On all of this with Peter Zwack. He's a retired brigadier general who served as the US's senior defense official and attaché to the Russian Federation from 2012 to 2014. He's joining us from Newport in Rhode Island. Thank you so much for joining us. So today there was obviously no ceasefire or peace deal agreed to, and no one was really expecting that to happen. But do you think some progress has been made?
I think there has been some progress as we discussed the prisoner of war exchange and some other items. But the bottom line, and Putin had a chance a few weeks ago to meet Zelensky and Trump, if you remember in the prior talks, and he turned his back on it. He decided not to do it. I think that there will be progress, but not until the major leaders, including Zelensky, meets. But I believe that Putin doesn't want to meet Zelensky at all. He looks down on Zelensky. He doesn't see Zelensky as a real leader. He doesn't see Ukraine as a real country. And this is why I think, in part, we have secondary negotiating groups. This is going to take some time. We had a moment when President Trump and Zelensky were in the region, were ready to meet Putin, and he balked and he backed off. And I believe that was a strategic mistake by Putin, because Trump increasingly sees Putin as a block in the road now, rather than a country to deal with. So there are so many plots and subplots. This all in the middle of this backdrop, this extraordinary drone attack that the Ukrainians pulled off just yesterday, that we can talk further about. But this is also a major black eye for Putin internationally, but probably more locally and domestically, because the Russian news and the bloggers all picked it up and have had to talk about it, talk around it, or talk directly about it. So much to talk about.
Yes, certainly. You've outlined it all so well, because there are so many factors here about what happens next. But I want to pick up on the point about Vladimir Putin not recognizing Zelensky. He often calls Ukraine a regime. The Russians, even the media, says that Zelensky isn't the real leader because Ukraine should have held elections. Of course, according to their constitution, they can't because they're under martial law. But if Putin was to sit down with a leader, would it be someone like President Trump, who has been pushing him and has had some very harsh words towards him over the last week or so? It was just, I think, last weekend where he called him absolutely crazy.
Yes, which is a quite remarkable change in narrative from our side, from Trump, because what he wants most is to see a deal, a treaty, to just get this stopped, and that's where he's put his focus. If he doesn't see it happening, he's discussed just turning his back and walking away from it all, which wouldn't be helpful. So Putin is in a quandary, because he's going to have to meet Zelensky to make this credible. And in doing so, he is tacitly recognizing Zelensky as the president of Ukraine, and that Ukraine is a real country, not a dominion of the former Russia, Soviet Union.
Yeah, Ukraine has been calling for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Russia not agreeing to that, saying they would rather have 2 or 3 days of a truce. But then on top of that, Kyiv says that more sanctions should be slapped on Russia. But will these sanctions actually have any effect on the way that Russia continues to conduct this war? Because we know that despite a raft of sanctions when it all started, the Russian economy grew last year and they are still exporting oil and gas to Europe, even though it's via other means in other countries.
It's a great question. The sanctions will be an irritant to Russia and to the nomenclature, the elites that still support Putin. But it's going to need to be backed up by continued support by what I call the free-minded world to Ukraine, who has shown a remarkable, what we call moxie, remarkable moxie in standing up to the Russians and seemingly get the inside turn on them militarily every time they fight. The Ukrainians have been under a lot of pressure. The Russians are at their best when they just work to grind down the Ukrainians and connected trench lines. The drones are flying all over on both sides. But this one, where a good chunk of their, what they used to call strategic aviation, bears and blinders, these are strategic aircraft that are nuclear capable, but were also what they called milk cows earlier in the war, where they carried lots of cruise missiles offshore, off distance, over the Black Sea or over the Caspian Sea, over Belarus, and they'd be firing the cruise missiles in. And they still do that. And this was a major blow. When you lose, whether the number is 7 or 40 or less, it's a big number when you're talking about strategic assets. And it's all over Russian TV. And they're having to spin it now for their own population.
What then do you make of that attack that happened on Sunday, coupled with the fact that we've got major countries in Europe like Germany and the UK massively upping their defense spending for the next few years because they view Russia as a threat, but also possibly because of the Trump administration and things that Donald Trump has said about those countries not contributing enough to NATO. But that must be a concern for the Kremlin because one of their biggest qualms before the start of the war was NATO expansion and Ukraine possibly ever becoming part of NATO.
It could be fleeting, but momentum has changed right now in what we call the mainstream world diplomatically. And you're right. The Europeans have pulled together rather impressively and are going to continue to support heavily Ukraine. Not only were there Ukrainian drones, but now they've been given permission to fire long range the weapon systems that the British and Germans in particular gave them, and the French. And then we have our ATACMS there. So this is putting a lot of pressure on the Russians. It's self-inflicted by the Russians because they are so stubborn about finally coming to the table and ending this, but they don't want to end it in this term because they want all of the 4 provinces that we talked about. They want to make sure that any security guarantee for Ukraine is forever annulled. And I think that the West isn't going to have that anymore. And it's not just the West. It's what I call the free-minding world out in Asia, your country, And so Russia is feeling a lot of pressure. And this is one thing that does worry me. Putin was embarrassed yesterday. And the news hasn't been going well for him in the last few weeks. But he was embarrassed yesterday. And we have to pay attention of how will he respond? And that could be in quite a dangerous way.
Absolutely. Peter Zwack, it's been really great to get your insight and appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.